In our earlier lesson, we explained the difference between the relative pitch and the absolute pitch, which brings the question, where do relative pitch come from? For absolute pitch, we understand that they come from matter, from like the key on the keyboard. Where do relative pitch come from? The short answer is the tones of the movable dose scales are mathematical. They come from the 2-to-1 and 3-to-2 ratios. Of course, there was a cultural environment in the West that brought those tones from history, from the Egyptian, from the Greeks. But in ancient Greece, that relationship with mathematical ratio was found. That will bring us to discuss modality versus tonality, and because we talk about mathematics, completeness versus incompleteness. First, when we talk relationship between mathematics and music, we've got to understand there are three very different periods in history. The perception of mathematics as we understand here in the 21st century was quite different originally. In ancient Greece and up to the Reformation and the Enlightenment, mathematics and music both assumed as their foundation truth that could not be understood. Call them first principle, call them divinity, but it was quite accepted that not everything could be understood. The quadrivium of classical education included music as the study of number in time, along with arithmetics, the study of numbers in their purity, geometry, a study of numbers in space, and astronomy, study of numbers in both space and time. Music was called modal, and we'll explain what that is, but pretty much it has to do with our human ability to transpose that we discussed in our previous lesson. And theology was the queen of the science. Then in 16th, 18th century came what we'll call broadly the Enlightenment. And for this period until the early 20th century, music became tonal. Rhythm was metered. We'll explain the difference with modal. And polyphony and equal temperament, we'll also explain what that is, became the norm. Mathematics became the queen of the science. And there was an ongoing search for the logical foundation of mathematics so that all truth could be proven mathematically. What the mathematician Hilbert called the theorem of completeness. That was the goal. But in the early 20th century, one of Hilbert's students, a mathematician called Gödel, proved that mathematics do not have a logical foundation. He was looking for a theorem of completeness. He found the theorems of incompleteness. Yet, scientism, the faith, but scientism is the faith that science can explain everything, endured and grew. We have scientism all around us today, yet it was proven that mathematics do not have a logical foundation. Innovation also continued to drive music with atonality, with noise in avant-garde music, including the noise of the street in any kind of music that could be made with instrument is an example. And popular music became packaged. Thanks to recording, thanks to digitalization, it was possible to hear music without any musicians. And therefore, music could become an identity marker without any musical skills. The liturgical movement, on the other hand, sought to restore Gregorian chant's pride of place in church ritual. And chant is modal. Modal, again, has to do with the ability to transpose and the relativity of one note to another. Pythagoras, the Greek mathematician who lived in the 6th century before Christ, established the link between the sound that were harmonious to his culture and the proportion 2-to-1 and 3-to-2. How did he do that? He took a string and he had it vibrate. and he took the same string and had it vibrate only for half of the string, which in turn is vibrating twice as fast. And he noticed that that was very harmonious, that you could barely distinguish the two sounds, that we call now an octave. But that proportion of 2 to 1 was very harmonious. And then he did to the same string, cut it at 2/3, and vibrated 3/2 faster the part that gave him another harmonious sound that we call today a fifth. So, building from the note we would today call fa, if we vibrate the string 3/2 faster, we find a do, then 3/2 faster we find a so, then 3/2 faster we find a re, then 3/2 faster we find a la, and 3/2 faster we find a mi. And this will be spread on 3 different octaves, except that since the octaves can barely be distinguished by the human ear, then we can bring those 6 notes into a sequence of closed frequencies, and that gives us do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, the hexachord of 4 full steps and 1 half step. Later, a diatonic scale and later a chromatic scales were defined from that same method. So that 2 to 1 and 3 to 2 proportion that felt harmonious to Pythagoras, well, he had some good reasons for that. He had what we call the overtones that he also discovered by moving a string and pulsating a string. He noticed that there was an overtone created of twice the frequency of that string. That would be the second loudest sound. And there was another overtone of 3 times the frequency. That will be the third loudest sound. And that's true for our vocal cords. So actually, those harmonies of 2 to 1 and 3 to 2s are in our body when we sing. Because if our vocal cords vibrate at a certain frequency, we have overtones at twice those frequency and 3 times those frequencies that we do here in our body, that we feel in our body. And modal music, so that music that is the relation of sounds that are linked to the human voice, can be defined in difference with the tonal music, where the interval is in modal music more important than the tone. Vibration is more important than the sound. Duration is more important than the beat. Movement from one note to another is more important than the position of these notes. And the means used to produce music are more important than the goal. In modal music, so the hexachord was transposed. We will move, so we do do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, and then at the la we say, oh, that's our do now. We start again from la, and that becomes our do. And for the human voice, that worked quite well, because the human voice has a limitation of about 2 to 3 octaves, all humans together. But instruments have a much broader range. So it was necessary to expand that scale. And this is where the hexachord was expanded to a diatonic scale, then to a chromatic scale. How? By continuing that 2 to 1 and that 3 to 2 proportion. So if we do the 3 to 2 proportion 12 times, then we end up to what would have been, starting from a C1 note, we will end up to a B sharp 7. And if we do the same system with the proportion of 2 to 1, we have a C1, C2, C3, and we have a C8. And those 2 notes, if we had an exact chromatic scale, should be the same, but they are not. They have a difference of what is called the Pythagorean comma. And that made modal music theory quite complicated and a little bit hard to control. And musicians like to control things. So to continue innovating in instrumental music, to have more predictability beyond the range of the human voice, the equal temper tuning was introduced in opposition to the just tuning, which would have been the tuning of Pythagoras. This equal temper tuning was consisted in approximating the the, 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 the tone of the notes so that we have equal semitone between each keys. And that's how the keyboard, the equal tempered keyboard, was created. That difference is really a technicality in the field of music because it's just a matter of tuning strings versus tuning piano. But liturgically is quite important because now we broke totally with the proportionality that we find in the human voice. And we hide the incompleteness of music that is inherent to modal music in the mathematical sense. We want a music that is complete, that is controllable on the 88 keys of a keyboard. That's a big difference between modal music and tonal music.